It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Sapp, and we're so excited to be back for Season 6 and continue bringing you outstanding ideas and thought leaders and different ways of thinking. So don't forget to subscribe because you're not going to want to miss any of it. This week I'm joined by returning guest Kan Vu. Last time he joined us, he discussed his leadership journey. This week he's here to talk with us about the bamboo ceiling. It's something that's out there, but many of us don't know about it, so don't miss this important conversation. It's Monday, November 25th. Welcome to episode 264. Hey everybody, it's Monday, November 25th. Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody in the U.S. who celebrates. Welcome to this week's episode of Radio Free 501c. I'm your host, Cecilia Sapp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting. Really glad to have you all here with us. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our global audience, wherever you may be. Quick reminder, if you haven't followed us yet or subscribed on your favorite podcast service, please take a moment and do that so you don't miss any more exciting episodes or great conversations like this one we're having today. We have returning guest Kan Vu joining us. We're going to discuss a really important topic that people probably don't know much about. It's called the bamboo ceiling. So we're going to dive into that conversation. But first, Kan, welcome back. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Thank you, Cecilia, for having me back. We had a great conversation last time. I look forward to this time's conversation. Yeah, I'm the CEO and Executive Director for the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers, SASE for short, or sometimes people call it SASE, which we are sometimes, but we prefer to call it ourselves SASE for short. And I've been doing this for 14, 15 years now. But I also have a background as a chemical engineer by training, and then worked in the petroleum industry, oil and gas, Asian retail. I have a real estate license that's inactive. I was in higher education, so a little bit here and there, and I'm also identify as cisgender male. I'm an immigrant. My first language is not English, but I'm trying every day.
Well, you're doing a good job. And boy, people tell me I'm busy and have a full schedule. You definitely have a full schedule. So let's talk a little bit about the bamboo ceiling. It's something I think we all need to know more about. You and I, as we were getting ready for this episode, we talked a little bit about stereotypes and how people don't really get to know each other. It's very easy to use a stereotype and say, well, women act like this, men act like that. That's probably the broadest stereotypes we have. But the bamboo ceiling is very interesting to me because, in my experience, in my opinion, I've always just thought of people of Asian descent as just being very successful in whatever they choose to do. But I know there's some stereotypes out there, and maybe they're not getting the same opportunities and advantages as other groups are getting. So could you explain to us from your experience what the bamboo ceiling is and where that term came from?
More than happy to, and I'm glad you're inviting me in to talk about this issue because I think there's a lot of untapped potential around the bamboo ceiling that we haven't talked about or people may not be aware of. One of the overall arching maybe stereotypes of Asians is the model minority, and the bamboo ceiling is underneath that. What that bamboo ceiling says is that Asians are really great technically, great worker bees, very studious, but they're not leaders. And so just like the glass ceiling, there is an upper limit, and the data shows this, right? If you look at Asians in most workplaces, they are great at the entry levels, especially professionally. But then when you get to the manager level, they fall off quite a bit. And then if you get to the executive level, they fall even harder. And so, for example, an unnamed large tech company, which we all subscribe to, and there will be Prime Day coming up, hint, hint. If you look at their technical workforce, right, the number of Asians in their technical workforce ranges anywhere from 50 to 60%, 50 or 60% Asian. But then if you look at the top leadership level and two levels from there, I think I only know one or two names from that group that's Asian. So what happened to the 50, 60% of a technical organization that falls down to maybe single digits? something happening. And that's not just for this one particular company. You look at a lot of companies across the board. There are some companies that do better and pay attention to the issue of bamboo ceiling. And there's, for the most part, and this also affects, whether you talk about the legal profession or hospital administration or any other type of, corporate America in particular, because we know that the leadership culture in America is British based, right?
Yes.
And if you look at the British based culture, you look at the parliament, the British Parliament, and how are you successful at the British Parliament? Well, you're standing up there trying to verbally joust with everyone. You're pointing at each other. You're very exaggerated, and you use your tone, your inflection, right? And these stories and these analogies. So it's a lot of verbal jousting. The Asian culture, when it comes to leadership, is very, let's say, Confucius based. It's where there's hierarchy, there's order, there's position respect. We call it power distance, right? Where it's more flat in the US and the British base, people aren't more of pomp and circumstances, where there is an order in the Asian culture. So we don't question, we're not taught to question, right? One of the first personal examples that I had that really sits to me to this day is when I graduated and I was working as a production engineer at Amoco. My engineering manager, Pete Mueller, who I still keep in touch with off and on to this day, one day he pulls me aside, we were talking, and he just said, "Khan, are you listening?" And I was like, "What do you mean, Pete?" "My ear is pointed your way. I'm listening." And he goes, "No, no, no, you have to look me in the eye." And that was the very first time anybody has ever told me that, oh, you look with your eyes. You look at somebody to indicate you're paying attention. Because in the Asian culture, when I show my father, who is position higher than me, when I'm listening, is I look down, I point my ear to him, and I physically shrink a little bit, to show him, and I'm steady and still to show him that I'm paying attention. All my energies towards his way. I would never look in the eye, because looking somebody in the eye, especially an older member when they're talking, is showing a sign of disrespect or challenging. So that was the first time I was like, wait a minute. This is not the message that I was raised up on. This is totally and from a scientific level, right? What does your eyes has to do with listening? That always put me
Well,
off. Like, how do you listen with your eyes? Right? So I met
well,
this,
you can't. That's true.
yeah. I met this professor who actually did a study, and he's out of CU Boulder, because he had similar cultural issues. And he said, well, how long should I look? Right. And so his research showed that anywhere from 4 to 8 seconds is how, at least in the Western American culture, you indicate that you're paying attention to somebody. If you look more than 8 seconds, it could either be creepy, scary, or threatening.
Right.
Or you're in love. You're in love, right?
That's right.
But
That's right. It also depends on a lot of the other body language that goes along with when you look somebody in the eye. That's really interesting, though, because you and I talked about this a little bit the first time you were on the show about the different cultural aspects of how we listen, how we show respect, how we demonstrate we're paying attention. And they're really very different. I was always told to look at people because if you don't look at people, they think you're not paying attention.
correct.
Just like your friend Pete said, "Are you even paying attention to me? You're not even looking at me." And so that's really very different, and show your ear, which is what you actually listen with. Totally makes sense, right? I'm from Missouri, very commonsensical. Well, if I'm turning my ear to you, I'm going to do that. So do you think that those sorts of body language differences, it holds people back from leadership positions?
Well, we know that the study's shown that 80% of your communication is nonverbal, right?
Mhm.
And so, if somebody says, oh, they're not listening, so they're not interested, that means they're not engaged, right? And so when people believe that about you because of your body language, then they're going to say, oh, they checked out, they're not there. They do great work, but they're not engaged. And so leadership by far has to be engaged. And so
Right.
they both, what we find in our studies is that Asians who attend leadership, so Fortune 500 companies, they have leadership training left and right. So when they go to this as an Asian professional, the trainer will go, oh, you got to worry about your brand. You got to get out there and make sure you own your brand. You got to speak up. And then the Asian professional might feel, well, that seems kind of, loud and obnoxious. Maybe I'm not quite there. They'll turn to somebody in the classroom and they look at them and say, hey, well, how are you feeling? Oh, yeah, I get the message. Yeah, I know what they're trying to say. And you might even ask the instructors, like, you sure about this? And they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. This is the way it should be. So they might go, well, doesn't feel right. It's not for me because this is not how I was taught and it doesn't seem right. It doesn't sit right. And so sometimes they self-select out for one thing, right? And they're like, oh, all the stuff they say to me, it doesn't hit. It doesn't, it doesn't find the right spot. But when they come to one of our trainings, they turn to their classmates or the participants and they go, hey, do you feel kind of weird? And they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. It doesn't hit right. It doesn't sound like, leaders should do this. And then they'll ask the instructors like, hey, can you explain me why maybe this doesn't seem, they go, oh, we totally know why, because this is the cultural reasons why you may feel this way. And so you can see all the rooms in the head nod together and they accept it and they understand it. And so what we find in our surveys is people like, wow, I've never been in a room where I've been seen, heard, and I understand, and everybody around me understand the issues. And so that's why our training actually is more effective than your typical training because it doesn't hit right on a cultural note, right? And the trainer may not be aware of these cultural situations where you're telling people, oh, you got to raise your hand, you got to get involved, you got to speak up. They're like, that's not what I was taught, and it seems kind of off. And so I think there is a lot of, both on the personnel side in the sense of the individual checking out and saying, oh, leadership is not for me, but then their boss not knowing their difference, not nominating them, not understanding why they're acting the way they are, just think that they're not engaged and don't want to be a leader. And so they select them out too. So I think it's both sides.
That is so interesting. Now, and again, you and I talked about this before. Eastern culture, Asian culture is really more group driven. Western culture, especially the United States, is individual driven. Actually, a lot of the people who first came to North America were leaving those groups in Western Europe and Eastern Europe to get away from that, to go be individuals and do what they wanted to do. So I think that's why the US is, I love being an American. I'm very patriotic, but that's why we're a little crazy here in the US, because you have a lot of different individuals doing what they want to do, doing their own thing, as we used to say in the 70s. And a lot of our stories are about an individual doing something to make a difference, or an individual living their life very differently from whatever group they might be around. So we are very individual focused, whereas like stories from Asia are group focused. Is how is the group going to benefit? How can we elevate everyone, not just each individual? So it's much more driven that way, I think. Then again, here it's like people with the personal brand. I have to tell you, I grew up in the United States and I'm not comfortable with that, where, oh, your personal brand and promoting yourself. So I could see if you're coming from a very different background, that would really be uncomfortable. It might be like, getting hit with nails or something so uncomfortable. But what are some ways that we as leaders looking for new leaders and wanting to help people be leaders, what are some things we can do for people who do have that different cultural background from Asia, where you don't look people in the eye, but you still have leadership traits? How can we be more attuned to that?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of opportunities here. One of the reasons I agreed to be on this is I think more people need to tap into Asian talent for leadership, both on their members, because Asians are quote unquote overrepresented in the professional realm. So any association should have a ton of Asian members in general, particularly in the STEM areas, right? And then also your employees in the nonprofit world, your staff, they have leadership potential just because they're quiet. Maybe it's how they were raised. So to your point, I think understanding, first of all, you have to understand there is a cultural difference in leadership, right? Acknowledge that. And then learn about that and ask your employees, like, how did you interact at home with your parents, the elderly? Because I equate my first manager and how I treat him like my father in the sense, not that he was a father figure, he kind of was, but he also, that's how I knew to interact with somebody with that power distance, because we are very groupthink. Even how I introduce myself in Vietnam, I would introduce my family name first because that was the most important. And then my middle name, and then my first name would be last because it's de-emphasizing the individual. And so the implications of groupthink, you know, putting the collective before you, is Asians don't take on risk or challenge authority because it seemed as rude as not going along with the collective. So where in America, we want to see engage, you want to challenge the assumptions, you want to raise your hand, you want to interject, you want to say, how about this alternative? Where in the Asian culture, that might be seen as rude or interrupting, right? So there's this whole mindset that you have to, as an ally, understand and get familiarity with your folks to understand what they bring to the table, the actual skill set. Because given that we're not always trying to jump into the equation and the conversation all the time, we're processing, we're thinking, we're analyzing, right? So we look at the problem deeper. So maybe, the ideal world is you have deep thinkers and you have people who think and reflect before they speak. Where in America, we know in politics, people speak before they think sometimes, and they get
That's so true.
and so and it's sometimes rewarded, as we can see,
Yeah,
And so I think
it's true.
that's the thing about the allies, is that really, the first step to changing a situation is understanding the situation. How can I make it different? Where are my folks' background coming from? What do they come to the table with? And then how can I help them and help them understand? And that's really the mission of our organization, is even though we're a society of scientists and engineers, we do nothing technical, because if you want to build a better, nuclear plant, there is a nuclear plant organization out there that will help you nuclear plant. But what we're here to do, and all of our training and all our emphasis, is about talent and leadership. At the end of the day, we try to educate our folks to say, your behaviors that you were taught, respect is great as a value, right? You want to be respectful, but how does that respect show up in behavior? In the Asian culture, it may be being quiet, it's being deference, not raising your hand, not engaging the conversation. Because as a junior engineer, I would never interrupt and talk before my senior engineers. But then Pete said to me, look, Khan, I know you have ideas. Why don't you speak up at the group meetings? And I was like, well, I want to be respectful and let my senior engineers speak before I do. And if in any American meeting, that if you wait for everyone to speak, you're never going to speak,
That's
right?
right.
And so those things that I bring to the table wasn't aware by Pete or by many people. So I think as a leader, you have to learn your people and learn what they bring to the table and what skill set. They may be deep thinkers and have great solutions that they're not volunteering, right? And you're missing out on that.
Yes. And I think that's a great point you made about the way we run meetings in the US. Either one person does all the talking, or there's a cacophony and some people don't get to talk at all. So you really have to, as a leader of the team, you have to make sure you're letting everybody get in that conversation, or making sure they have that option. I agree with that. I also have learned over time, I'm not talking constantly. I pause a lot. Americans don't pause, they just keep going. So every time I pause before I finish my thoughts, somebody's jumping in. And I think that's some listening skills we all could be better at. I personally am a huge fan of thinking and working on our thinking skills. So I love having deep thinkers around, and we say we like deep thinkers. Would you say it's fair, and tell me if I'm wrong, that maybe we could use some approaches with people of Asian descent that are similar to introverts? So the introverted leader, the quiet leader, is a very different kind of leader than that extrovert leader, or even an ambivert leader who gets charged up by being around people and then needs to go be quiet for a while and be alone. So do you think we can learn from nurturing some of those things we can do to nurture an introvert leader when it comes to people from cultures that are not Western culture?
Definitely. But you can be an extrovert Asian and you can be an introvert Asian, right? So separating the techniques from the cultural training, I think is cool. If you look at it, I am an introvert Asian. honestly. I get my energy from the quiet moments by myself, not in a room with full of people. But I've learned how to adapt. My wife, she is an extrovert Asian, but very shy, right? So there's these layers and complexity. If she gets to know you and trust you, she can talk all day long. And that's it's energy from that. I don't, right? And so we look at each other and she knows my boundary is like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I need my space, right? So I think understanding your folks, just because they're Asian, they could be introvert or extrovert. They can be an extrovert but shy, right? They could be an introvert and shy, or so really understanding your folks and using some of those techniques. But I think one of the things, once you learn, then you build the trust, right? And saying, oh yeah, you can interrupt me, it's no problem. Or as I say, open the door. So if someone, as a leader in a group meeting, you notice that someone is not speaking up, you can say, hey, we've talked about this, and Tina, so and so, you and I talked about this. You had some great ideas. Did you want to share? So it's like opening that door for them and inviting them in, because normally, culturally speaking, they would not jump in. But if you invite them in, they'll share their ideas. So that's, one easy technique for group meetings that you can use to encourage them. But it's also having your employees or your staff or your members be aware of that their behavior is showing up differently because of the culture. They may not be aware, right? They just may assume, like everyone else, oh, I don't feel comfortable, so I won't speak up. Well, they don't know why they don't feel comfortable. Oh, it's because I was taught that way when I was younger, like not to speak up in a large group because it's all about you, and that's selfish, and that's not very nice and respectful, right? So they may not know that's what internally they're recording in their head is going on. So that's the other thing we do, is the first thing we try to teach our folks is being aware of yourself, knowing what you come to the table with. So that's something that I would say is people can learn and use as they work and interact with other people. And that's true for not just only Asians, but anybody else. Learn about the people around you, what they bring to the table, and how you can engage them, develop them to get to where they want to go. And they may not want to be a leader, but as long as they understand that's the behavior and the uncomfortableness comes from someplace else, rather than that they're not leadership material.
Well, see, and I think that assumption that someone's not leadership material simply because they don't talk a lot or participate in a meeting, it's so easy to get people involved, because if you just ask them to say something, that gives, like you said, it opens the door and gives them permission. So I think the easiest way to get people to talk about their ideas is put them on the agenda and let them know they're going to be on the agenda. And then that gives them that opportunity to speak, because some people need permission, or at least the feeling of permission. And while I know this is really a big part of Asian culture, there's all kinds of people who feel that way. One of the stereotypes of women, all women, is that they don't speak up. Women feel like, oh, I can't say anything, or I shouldn't say anything, or I have to wait to get called on. There's not a lot of women who just go out there and speak up and speak their mind and stand up for themselves. So that's few and far between. Do you think it's harder, even harder, for Asian women to try to have their voice heard?
100%. The data shows that too.
Mhm.
Asian women are the least likely to be promoted or considered for leadership position out of any intersection between gender and ethnicity. If you follow the trend lines, Asian women, what we call is a double ceiling. You have the glass ceiling and the bamboo ceiling. And you look back at, how Hollywood portrays Asian women, the memoirs of a geisha, right? Subservient, quiet, Miss Saigon, a prostitute. So how many Asian women besides Lucy Liu or Michelle Yeoh do you know who has a leading role? Not many. Why is that? Right? Is that's the challenge? Is the stereotypes of women are, for Asian women in particular, are doubled. Not only are they considered, women in that general category, but they're Asian women, so they're more subservient. I mean, you have websites that I see, marrying a more traditional woman, right? And they usually point at the Asian women that you can go and get abroad. I mean, what's up with that, right?
I know.
Stereotypes. So yes, Asian women in particular have a harder time in the corporate American world, and we have a couple of programs for that, like our Women's Leadership Conference. We have, we just started a mentoring group for 19 women. 18 of the 19 says, Khan, we want to continue this program, even though the program was supposed to be done. It was a pilot. They said, regardless of what you guys do, we're going to continue. We're like, okay, we'll continue the program because they found that this was a great space for them to speak up. It was a safe space for them. They had mentors who were, gone through that. There were executive women mentors in the group that they can share their life stories and the challenges that they have. And they've built a bond. I mean, they met for the first time at our conference. So all this mentoring and this work was done virtually. And they said to each other, like, I felt like I've known you for a long time. And this is the first time I get to meet you. So I love hearing those stories. I'm a girl dad. Of course, I have one daughter, 3 boys. She's a princess and she's fearless. And I love that. She's fearless. She's going to take the world. My song for her is Girl on Fire. She's going to, the world is her oyster and she's going to use it to however she wants it. So I want women to have that equal opportunity, and I want them to be just on a playing field. And that's the challenge, right? Because of the stereotypes, because to your point, expected not to speak up, because if you speak up, then you're too aggressive. You're, the B word, whatever, right?
Right.
But if a man does it, it's okay. It's like natural. And so I think there's a lot of things that we have to check ourselves in assumption that when we look at people and just ask and get to your point earlier, get to know people and who they are and what they bring to the table and how can that contribute to the overall success of the organization.
Wow, so much in there, so much in your comments. It's hard enough trying to just get through the glass ceiling, let alone having to break through too, because, you have to break through that and the bamboo ceiling. And I think it's really sad, Con, you mentioned, like, who do you know that are Asian women actors? Michelle Yeoh and Lucy Liu. And Michelle Yeoh, fantabulous martial artist. So that's how she broke through. But then, Lucy Liu, mostly on television before she crossed over into movies. And the thing about a lot of the characters she's played, she hasn't played Asian characters usually, except in Kill Bill. She played an Asian character. She usually doesn't even play Asian characters. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but maybe it's good because she's just getting cast because she seems the right person for the job. I think, I'm just kind of flustered right now with myself because I can't think of any other Asian women that are acting today. I mean, I'm sure they're out there. I know they're out there. I see them. I probably watch them, but are they coming top of mind? They're not. And then I think that's wrong. It's not just sad, it's wrong. I think we need to know more. There's a lot of there is a lot of potential, as you've said, as we were getting ready for the episode. You really want to talk about there's so much untapped potential, which is why I wanted to ask you about, can we use some of the things that we know about introvert leaders to work with people, from a culture that's not Western based culture, and very individual based or very loud. Western culture is very loud. So it's really difficult, I think, in so many layers. And I'm trying to not say the wrong thing the wrong way, but if I do, I apologize. But what are some other ways? Now, you've talked about mentoring, which I'm a huge supporter of mentoring. I mentor people myself. There's mentoring, there's connection, there's doing the different kind of training you've mentioned that you do at SASE. So what are some other things we can do? We've talked about getting to know people. What are some other things we can do to tap this untapped potential and put out a leadership path that more people can follow?
Thank you for asking the question because, again, I believe that associations and nonprofits have a lot to offer in the world, but we also need to make sure that we raise the folks within our ecosystem, right? Our employees, our members, and raise them up to their full potential. there's a lot of things that you could do. I mean, we offer a monthly webinar that is free. So more than happy to send that link on to everybody so that they can just listen and learn, right? And it talks about, and then for Asian professional, it's led by a lot of folks who are Asian or who understand the Asian culture, and talks about how we can effectively handle the different things in our lives, whether it's mental health, whether it's assertiveness, whether it's your brand, whether it's the power distance or the different types of power, right? So we have a lot of those trainings for free online. So that's one way to access that. The other thing is to think about your folks who haven't raised their hand, in not only for meetings, but positions, volunteer positions or encouragement, because it helps that if you're a leader within an organization to reach out to folks who you don't see or who don't represent at the table, sometimes is represented at the table, for you to invite them to the table. If there's an opportunity to say, hey, you should be nominated for this position. I know you do great work, but I've never seen your name or, being suggested to them. So that invitation to be engaged, because the natural thing is not to raise your hand as much, because you're not taught to raise your hand. I think about my son and how we interact with my children. My oldest son loves to challenge me. He'll ask me like questions like, Dad, if I was accused of cheating using ChatGPT for my school because they have a no ChatGPT at his high school, will you defend me? Right?
Oh my gosh.
Or he'll ask me like, what can I do to get disowned? I was like, so he asks these really deep questions. And sometimes it's very annoying from an Asian culture standpoint, because you're like, why are you asking these things? But I know he's curious, and we're trying to teach him to jump in, to ask those questions, because he lives in America, right? He was born in America. And we don't want to say, I know everything, I'm the dad, you shut up type of thing, which is the expectation in a lot of more traditional Asian cultures. The father knows, the parent knows, the older members of the family knows, and the young is supposed to listen. I mean, there's a balance in between, right? And so we're trying to do those things. And so if you find folks in your group, and they may be introverted Asians, and they may not want to speak up, and so you have to use those introverted techniques that bring them out, and then also help them be aware that they may be, on top of being introverted, reinforced with these cultural behaviors that they were taught. So I think there's a couple things. Develop a rapport with your folks and invite them into scenarios and get to know them if they're introverted or not, right? If they're not, then they're more than likely they probably just need that invitation and they'll jump in, right? And then it's coaching, mentoring along the way because the first time you ride a bike, the first time you go on the dance floor, it's gonna be bad. If you never taught how to verbally joust, it's may sound kind of rude sometimes, may sound extreme, because you've not developed that nuance, right? You've not developed that tango rhythm of verbal dancing, because this is your first time, right? So you're going to step on people's toes, and you can try to laugh about it and reaffirm that's okay. You're learning. This is a learning, because as a young child, you weren't taught to talk back to your parents to tell them they were wrong, right? You're supposed to just say, yes, mom, yes, dad, I will be a doctor, I will be an engineer, right? And you're not taught to say, well, maybe I want to be something else. That wasn't an option as much. And so having folks and giving them a lot of grace and understanding that this may be their first time on a bicycle, the verbal bicycle, it may sound coming across kind of awkward, rude, maybe sometimes, and they need that feedback, right? They're like, hey, you might have used this term, and I know I invited you to come and speak up, and you might have just seemed a little bit aggressive. And so, because it's that nuance, the verbal language, the verbal debate is very nuanced in the US. And if you were never taught that skill as a young child and had a chance to perfect it and make all your mistakes there in a safe environment, then it's going to look weird in the professional space, and you're going to feel weird. And so as a leader, as a coach, as a mentor, encourage them and give them that feedback so that they can quickly come up to speed. And that's what we've seen with companies, is that the young folks coming in have to learn that within a short time. And they do, but if they're not aware, they fall behind quicker, because we know that at these large companies that it takes a while for them to identify talent. And they promote them early. So, for one company I know, if you're not promoted within the first 3 or 4 years, you're never going to be VP because it takes that long. If you're not promoted with 5 to 7 years, then you're never going to make director, right? So if your first promotion comes up in 10 years, well, guess what? You're never going to be director and you're never going to be VP at these large companies because they want to make sure they identify talent early and they rotate them to these plum jobs to get a good view of the company, right? And that's how leadership talent development. And that's why Asians struggle because they're not identified early enough and they're not encouraged and they're not practicing these skill sets that they may not have in their toolbox.
Well, and I think that's a very good point to make, especially, some associations and other nonprofits are very large groups. They have hundreds of employees. So I think that is going to hold true in the nonprofit management profession as well. If you're in a larger group, I think if you're in a smaller one, you have more opportunities to be identified, to get moved into promotion. But I wanted to follow up on your comment about verbal jousting. That is definitely something people need to practice. It is not something that very few of us pick up on that. I'm very quick-witted and I have something of a smart mouth, but I was also raised in a huge extended family with a bunch of other people who were very quick-witted and have a smart mouth. So I know a guy named Mark Stern who's always asking me, how do you always have a thing to say? Well, it was drilling. Basically, you have to practice it. And there's that repartee that you can develop with people, especially your coworkers. But you're right, it can come across very clunky if you're not used to doing it, if you don't get a lot of practice doing it. And you reminded me many years ago, an author named Sam Horn wrote a book called Tung Fu, The Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense. And so that's a great resource for people who maybe want to get better at that, having that repartee and being able to speak. And I also know if you can do speech competitions, like I did that in high school, I did speech competitions, and then there's also debate club and things like that. So for younger people out there in the world, maybe getting ready to go to college, decide what you want to do, those are some good things you can do too. And frankly, I am not against adults joining debate societies or things like Toastmasters, which is very helpful. And that's why I am also a big supporter of extemporaneous speaking. That is a great skill that helps you with that verbal repartee and jousting. Hopefully, you're not having to joust at work. You're able to just tell people what you think and you have a repartee instead of jousting. But this does come up, especially if somebody sees you as a competitor at work and they're trying to shut your idea down or something. You want to be able to defend your idea well. And that means practicing and just really putting that work in. So I think that's a great tip. I wanted to, before we wrapped up this episode, and first of all, I want to thank you again, Con, for coming and talking about the bamboo ceiling, because I think most people are not even aware of it. So I want to thank you for that. I wanted to ask you if you could share a little bit about what the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander group at ASAE might be working on in the coming months to help elevate recognition of people in AA and HPI in our profession.
Before I do that, I just want to comment on what you said. As Toastmasters, awesome. So for professionals, there's hundreds of clubs in the United States, so you can probably find one close to you. So definitely, I encourage you to practice in a safe space where you get feedback, and you'll get better if you're looking for a place to practice. Also, extemporaneous speaking. So I had to argue with my parents to join the NFL, the National Forensics League, not the National Football League.
Oh, right? I was like, you played football? Cool.
No, it was back then it was called the National Forensics League. I don't know what they call it nowadays, just debate maybe, but I signed up for forensics and for extemporaneous speaking. And so that's where I sharpened my skills because I thought I needed that. And I had to argue with that with my parents because they told me you should study more, right?
Oh.
And I was getting A's already, and I was like, I don't think so. But
how much more studying can I do?
Exactly that 2%, 98 to 100. Do I really need that? But to your point, that group for ASAE, we're trying to elevate. First of all, there wasn't a group about 3 or 4 years ago. And so Wendy Joe and Don Day got together and invited me to help form that first group. And we're trying there to help elevate folks because we felt like there wasn't representation and we didn't know where to go, right? And so the group has really bonded. And I would say if you have employees in the nonprofit world, please send them our way. We would love for them to join. We help them on a couple of different levels. A, to provide community, a safe place, right? We know that the women's network is usually the first one to form in most companies, and they grow and they support. And so there's a community for them. And so we would like to provide that for our group, is a place where we can talk about these issues, whether it's the bamboo ceiling, whether it's cultural challenges, whether it's opportunities. And so we are looking at redefining what our mission is now that we've grown up, and we probably have close to 60 or 70 people in the group, growing every day, maybe close to 100 unofficially.
Wow.
But we're looking at our charter to see what our group really wants. So that's where we are in that process. But I would invite folks to join us. Feel free to contact me. Probably a lot of people know Don Day or Wendy Jo Yama. She's currently our chair of the organization.
Oh, that's great. Yes, I know all of you. So, and Wendy Joe's a friend. So, hey, Wendy, good work, good work. So, and then before I ask for your final thought for the day, Con, for those who are not watching and listening, your background says happy birthday. Could you let us know whose birthday it is and what are we celebrating?
Sure. So SASES turned 17 in November, particularly November 7th is our official quote form of 501(c)(3). So we celebrate this birthday. So that's where the sign comes from. My birthday happens to be in November. My best man is the day after. My brother's before. His wife is the day before. So I have like a ton of November birthday. So I'm in a
Wow.
festive mood, I guess, in November. But yeah, go Scorpios.
It's great. Well, happy birthday, happy anniversary to SACE or SASSY, as some people call it. That's fantastic. Well, as you know, since you've been on before, Con, I like to ask my guests, what is the one thought you'd like the audience to take away today? And then how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to talk with you more?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. The thought I would leave everyone with is think about the untapped potential you have in your employees, in your membership, and how much greater that you would be if they were at the table and contributing, and how greater you would be in understanding what they brought to the table. And so that's what I would challenge everybody is to think about, is all these untapped potential. And it's not that much work if you think about it. And you're doing a service to someone that they may not know they could have been a leader, uh, but with your invitation and you're opening the door to that conversation could start that journey for them. Like Pete did for me, right? So Pete only had to say, Con, are you listening? I was like, I am totally listening. I am tuned in. I didn't know that's what I was communicating. And that started on me this whole journey of discovering who I am, how can I contribute? And, now I run one of the largest Asian American organizations in the United States
Wow.
with just that invitation of, are you listening? Right. And I would say is you can contact me for on LinkedIn is where I am mostly. So it's pretty easy. First name, last name, SACE, if you want to put it in there. That would probably be the best way. Message me there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you accepting my invitation to come back and talk about this topic. I think it's really important that we as human beings try to understand each other and really get to know each other as opposed to making broad comments about entire groups of people that we really don't know much about when you think about it. So thank you again.
My pleasure. It's always fun to talk to you, Cecilia. And yeah, I hope people take a lot from this and feel free to reach out. We have a lot of, tools, tips, like I said, webinars, and we can connect you with trainers that may help your group too. We're not in the business of creating content. We're in the business of connecting people. So more than happy to connect, our resources to whatever needs you have.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. So we have to go rogue for now. We'll be back next time with another exciting episode and interesting in-depth conversation. So again, please, if you haven't yet, take a moment, subscribe, or follow us on your favorite podcast service. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization think differently and bloom outside the box, Check out our website, roguetulips.com, and let's schedule a conversation. Let's see if we can work together. If you're interested in education for nonprofit professionals, specifically if you're getting ready for the CAE exam in 2025, or you are more interested in getting that ethics renewal credit, check out our education page and see what our schedule is coming up. We still have a December ethics session coming up if you want to take the ethics course for your renewal, or just because you want to learn more about ethics. And sharing some good news again, my first book came out last Friday, November 22nd. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check out my book. It's exclusively on Amazon.com and was published by Broken Column Press. So hopefully you'll check out my book. And if you have questions about the book, let's talk about that too. So on behalf of Con and myself, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.